Well, Sami, just then on the people who have been fleeing, how do you expect the humanitarian situation to look in a couple of weeks' time if Mosul is taken back and we have this kind of three-way fight for control of the city?
To be honest, I expect the humanitarian situation to be quite severe, if only because if you're celebrating the use of militias or the Iraqi army, which is also considered sectarian, if you're celebrating them as forces that liberated Mosul, it becomes very difficult all of a sudden to turn around and say they are the perpetrators of a humanitarian crisis. So I give an example. In Diyala, when there was a mass migration of the Sunni population, it was very difficult for the world to turn around and say, yes, well, we know the militias did it, the very militias who liberated the city, but we can't just turn around now and say that they're committing war crimes. I think the humanitarian crisis will be severe, but it will not receive as much attention as Yemen and Syria, because the bigger picture for these powers is to show that we got rid of ISIS, we got rid of terrorism, and therefore we are a legitimate fighting force here in Iraq.
You say that, Sami, but the regional powers are involved in this, as we've laid out in this discussion. What do you think the international community will be doing going forward? I'm thinking about countries like Turkey, especially the United States as well, to make sure that those warnings you've just laid out don't actually take place.
Well, you're suggesting that somehow the international... Your question suggests, not you, your question suggests that somehow there is an international community that is united on Iraq. The Kurds are being backed by Turkey, and the Iraqi army is being backed by the US, both of which have different interests when it comes to this battle in Mosul. The Turks want the Kurds to provide a buffer to any independent Kurdish state that is being pursued by the YPG in Syria. The US, on the other hand, have already given assurances to the Kurds that they will help facilitate some form of independence in any aftermath in Iraq. And then there is Iran, which wants to emphasize that the militias are the #1 power, and it wants to cement its authoritarian rule or influence in Baghdad. So in terms of what can the international community do, well, the international community first has to decide which interests are greater, which interests are worth pursuing, and whether a humanitarian crisis is worth putting their own individual interest aside for the better of the greater good.
We do wait and see, Sami Hamdi. Very interesting stuff. Sami Hamdi from the International Interest magazine. Thank you.